record. Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. The Jason Cavness Experience is brought to you by Cavness HR. At Cavness HR, we deliver HR to companies with 49 or fewer people. Cavness HR, focus on your business. We've got your HR. Our guests today are Shrav and Candice of People Runway. Are you ready to be great today?
Yes.
The two of them founded People Runway to support startups going through transformation and to work with companies to build a culture, people roadmap, and people processes. This includes career paths, performance management, manager leadership development, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and HR infrastructure. They were both founding members of Google's people operations team and helped scale Google teams, offices, and processes during periods of high growth and change. Thank you two for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Jason.
So talk about the process of, going from Google to being involved with HR for startups. I mean, it has to be a pretty monumental shift, I would think.
Yeah, so, interestingly, we both started at Google early on, around 2004, 2005. And so these were a time of significant growth and change. And so we were able to jump in pretty early and build a lot of things from scratch. So when we started to work with startups, I think we really missed that opportunity to put in really strong processes, build the right DNA, the right blueprints to really inform the company culture. So, although we both left Google at a time when it was pretty large, we were there early on and really helping formulate some of the earlier components of the people operations.
Yeah, and to add that, I think one of the reasons both of us were motivated to leave was to be able to take what we learned to other places and to help, the employee experience and make work better and focus on culture early, because we saw that at Google and we saw how that sort of scaled as Google grew. So we were really passionate about doing that for others as well.
So Google, is the attitude they're now like, we're a corporate powerhouse on the lines of Amazon, Apple, or Google's attitude still, no, we're still a startup. We're still a startup.
So Google is very interesting, because I think, I always, we joke that Google is sort of this, is an adult that wants to still be, a teenager or younger. And that's, some of the great parts of being at Google, and some of the struggles that Google has is how to kind of hold on to that entrepreneurship mentality, that speed, agility, being able to get things done while still being, 100,000+ across, globally, and in so many different businesses. So maintaining those dualities and polarities has been actually one of the things that Google has been able to do and struggles with.
And how do you, like at Google, Google's known, for having great culture. How do you keep a great culture? You go from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to hundreds of thousands of people. How do you keep that same culture? I mean, how's that even possible?
And the culture is in everything that you do, everyone that you bring into the company, every interaction, every decision, every conversation. And so I think a lot of things that Google did well was making everyone feel responsible for living and maintaining and sustaining the culture, having very open, transparent processes, weekly company all hands, very broad, open communication where employees were encouraged to hold the leaders accountable, hold each other accountable as well. I think that, it's not one individual, it really needs to exist across the entire organization.
So talk about why performance management, or whatever term you want to use, is important for startups.
I mean, really at the end of the day, organizations want employees to be able to bring their full ideas, their full potential to work, and really, bring everyone together to achieve the organization's goals and OKRs, if you use that terminology. And the reality is that organizations need to set these expectations. What are we trying to achieve as a company? And then what is your specific contribution? So when we talk about performance management with organizations, I think the first place we start is, what are the company goals? What are the department goals? What are the individual goals? Like, what's expected of that individual? And then how, as a leadership team, as a management team, are you setting those individuals up for success so they truly can perform? And that be it both the resources, be it both the time, be it both this upskilling, And then if they're not performing, how are you holding them accountable? What are what is it that's preventing them from performing? Is it roadblocks? Can you help remove those roadblocks? Is it education? Is it learning that they need? Maybe there are other issues maybe at home that might be preventing them or distracting them. So looking at it holistically. And then ultimately, if there are other components, maybe they're just disengaged, maybe they're no longer seeing that fit at the company, making sure that there's a smooth transition there. So performance management does not take place 1 week out of the year or 2 weeks out of the year. It needs to be ongoing through goals, through feedback, through recontracting those expectations and giving those feedback.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, and I mean, today, in today's context, and I think we would be remiss to sort of not take in what's happening around us in the world today, in terms of social inequities, and those show up at the workplace, and the way we set up our culture, but the processes that support that culture, performance being a very, very key part of that. How are we really equalizing the playing field to be able to recognize performance for everyone? People of different backgrounds came from a different sort of lens, right? And then taking that forward and sort of systematically looking at how are we developing people, how are we giving and receiving feedback, how are we doing promotions. I mean, all of this sort of has to kind of be borne by that entire sort of cyclical process that Candice was referring to, which is it's not a week in a year. It's every day. It's in our one-to-ones with our teams. It's in the way we are presenting at meetings. It's all the time.
And if I may add to that, within the context of COVID-19, those goals, those expectations need to be agile and flexible. I mean, the company goals for Q1, Q2 have been, we're talking with clients and they're completely throwing them out the window, and they're redefining and restructuring what the goals are for 2 weeks now, for every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. These long-term plans are no longer realistic. So as an organization, having those systems and those conversations in place to be able to pivot and shift and adjust, and then to be fair to your employees. It's not fair to hold them accountable to goals that are no longer relevant. And so recontracting those as you need in the context.
And Jason, you mentioned, your question was about in the startup space, and that's exactly where it is the most important, because often startups have not, they're still sort of new in their evolution, so they may not have gone through something that's similar. For COVID-19, nobody, we didn't know that the impact of that. No one's been through it, but when similar things have taken place, when companies have had to move very quickly, agility is really important. That's where how we handle these processes and how we kind of show up for the employees becomes really important, especially in a startup where it's usually a smaller employee base, and everything is much more higher resolution.
And I was on LinkedIn maybe a few days ago when somebody put on, everyone who answered the question in 2015 on the job review, where will you be in 2020 in 5 years? Everyone's got that question wrong, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So there's like probably hundreds of performance management programs out there, from the traditional one time a year, which everyone all knows wrong, to all the AI stuff out there. Is there one performance management plan or program that you think is like right for startups?
I think the key thing, and this is not just startups, this is everyone, is performance and feedback needs to be ongoing. It needs to be real time. It needs to be specific. And, companies might reach out to us and say, hey, can you help us build out a performance management system or process? You have to have the culture first. You need to have that ongoing components built into everyday conversations, weekly one-on-one meetings, team meetings as well, where you're getting feedback from your peers. What does the ideal performance management system and process look like? It depends on the company, it depends on their goals, and it depends on what they're striving for. But we really encourage companies to start first with building that culture of feedback so that folks feel comfortable at any point giving that feedback. And then if you're wanting to move towards a bit more structure, aligning that performance with goals and OKRs, what's the appropriate cadence? For some companies, it's quarterly. For other companies, it's every 6 months. For others, it's once a year. And then, making sure that you're thinking through what are the data points and the entry points. Are you getting peer feedback? Are you getting it from, from clients that you're servicing? So it's really kind of customized by each company. But performance management's hard, and you constantly need to tweak and revisit and make sure that you're achieving the goals that you want it to be. It just can't stand alone. It's not one and done.
So I'm hearing you say is like, if your company does not have a learning culture already, you don't even waste your time performance management. Set up your learning culture first, right?
Absolutely.
So we were talking about startups. What is your two definition of a startup?
I mean, companies that are intending to scale, high growth potentially. They may be self-funded or working in partnership with venture capitalists, but they're rolling out a product that they hope can scale to, targeted audiences. Not necessarily small businesses, not necessarily just focused on local, but they really have that scaling aspect to it, be it through the product and then ultimately through their people.
Yeah, and then I mean, I think there's also the startup mindset, which is around transformation, right? So how do we move quickly? How do we change? How do we sort of be ready to pivot? And how are we constantly making our processes sort of scaling our processes and our teams to change and shift with our growth? I think that sort of is something that we also find a lot in that startup space.
So even before COVID-19, though, I think there's a shift going towards remote work. But how do you have a remote work team and still have a great culture? Or is that even possible?
How do you have them instead of a great culture,
No,
or?
how do you have a remote team and a great culture? How do you
And
get both?
yeah, we're talking with a lot of companies right now. I mean, you're hearing in the news companies that are allowing remote indefinitely for, some of their population, if it makes sense. I mean, there's so many benefits from it, from real estate, from flexibility as well. I mean, the key thing is that if you have issues internally with your remote or not remote, they're still going to manifest and show up. So building a really good, we talk about having a remote first mindset where that every interaction, every design, be it team decisions, be it goal setting, et cetera, you're thinking about every employee and giving every employee the opportunity to weigh in on those and have an opinion and perspective on those. So being more comfortable with working asynchronously, not having, specific time zones, time where everyone has to be on at the same time, 8 to 5, providing that flexibility, because individuals may need that flexibility given their home environment or even the time zone that they're working in. Building in really clear team norms. So if you're on a Zoom call, you don't have one person that's dominating the conversation. People can raise their hands through chat. You're constantly looking at the chatter feed and making sure that you're answering questions, making sure that everyone's included in the conversation. There's research that shows that women are less likely to interrupt a conversation, and that it's exacerbated on video calls as well. So how do you make sure that every voice is heard and included? So there's a number of things that you need to do to put those processes in place that can sustain and maybe even enhance your culture. There are some opportunities where remote first has so many benefits to it. It doesn't have to be either or. It could really be a value add.
Yeah, and intentionality is key. I think whether it's remote or in person, right? I think a lot of companies think that culture it'll evolve naturally and organically, and it does, right? And it does, but having the intention to really sort of stop and think about what is the culture that I want for us, for all of us, and put in norms and milestones to kind of watch that grow. I think is important. And the same thing translates into when you're already remote, or you're going remote, or you're growing in general, right? How do we translate or scale our culture when not everyone is in a small space together?
Now, also, just shifting our definition of work. Sometimes the perception is that work means that you are in the office and you are at your desk working. And ultimately, isn't it about the business goals that you're trying to achieve and the OKRs you're trying to achieve, and really shifting it on an outcome-based format? So what is it that we want to accomplish? Everyone might be working at different time periods or asynchronously, but as long as we're achieving our goals, that becomes much more important than if you're in front of your computer from 9 to 5. You might need to build in some flexibility, but shifting that and really leveraging the benefits of it. There's research that shows that employees actually can be more productive working from home, and so that releases them to be a bit more independent, and managers as well.
Yeah, so I'm just to say this when it comes out, because eventually all this is gonna be over with, right? And so those them coming out, they're gonna be like, okay, you've been working remotely for 2 or 3 months, come back to office at 9 to 5, and I think workers are gonna be like, okay, let me get this right. I've proven I can work remotely. All the ROI is done. Everything's been increased. So you want me to go ahead and come back and drive an hour to work, an hour back, and be in my cubicle 8 hours again. I think this gonna be like a shift coming up. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just like to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I think we can expect, you're absolutely right, and we can expect others who are eager to go back, who really did want to have that physical sort of social interaction, or that just kind of not every interaction is the same when you're having it remotely versus in person. Be able to go out and have that beer afterwards, or whatever it is that that people did in a workplace when you were all together. So yeah, there's going to be a mix, but I think the shift that we're seeing, and we're talking to a lot of companies who are startups as well as larger companies, where it's been incredible, even when they thought that this could not work, how much it has. Google is an example. I mean, Google, if you think about what Google started doing, decades ago, and then has really been followed by a lot of other companies and startups, especially in this area, has been centered around working physically in the office, right? You talk about the food, you talk about the extracurricular, all of those things were based on that mindset of when people come together, that's where great ideas are born, because people are interacting, there's discourse, there's debate, and great ideas and innovation comes from that. We've seen that this has been a really difficult time, but we're all agile, we're flexible. The work hasn't stopped, productivity hasn't stopped, right? So it's really put many of these old adages on top of its head and made us relook at everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that Google had the original lockdown plan, right? Everyone was locked down on Google. You can't leave.
Well, yeah, it was hard.
And talking about happy hours, I mean, I've seen people doing Zoom happy hours. I don't care what you do. Zoom happy hour is not the same as a real happy hour, right? It can be nowhere close.
Yeah. Go ahead, Candice.
The key theme that we're seeing here is just the need to be flexible, the need to be able to flex, to adjust to whatever that employee needs, where they feel like they can be most productive. For some, it's at home. For some, it's at work. But shifting it where it's not a one size fits all anymore. It can't be.
So I'm a big believer that everyone is not a good remote worker. When you hire somebody to be a remote worker, how do you make sure they can be a good remote worker? What kind of systems or tests should people use for that?
Well, I think it's, the conversation and asking them about experiences where they've worked from home, but focusing really on the outcomes. How do they find the right people that they need to virtually? You can't tap somebody on the shoulder. How do they problem solve? How do they remove roadblocks? And then, setting up those really clear expectations at the beginning, and then holding them to those expectations, making sure that you're getting them the resources. I think it's similar with anyone that you hire. You don't always know everything when you go through the interview process. The interview process is fallible. But setting up those expectations and adjusting if they're not able to be productive. But I don't know. I maybe I'm an optimist, but I like to think that most people want to be productive. They want to accomplish their goals. If they're not, I doubt that it's remote working that's the obstacle. There may be some other things that might be getting in the way that you can problem solve with them together.
Okay. Next question. And I think startups and companies do a bad job of this. I think most companies do a bad job of training their managers, either first-time managers or online managers. And the manager think they do like a lot of the, in-person work, How do we fix that? Or can it be fixed?
Yeah, I read a quote. I wish I remember the source, but it was yesterday, and it was to HR leaders, and it basically was, HR leaders, you are only as good as your worst manager.
So I like that. Yeah, that's good.
So, good managers, it's a lot of work. It's both, more formal training, but also informal training, building out a manager community, be it a Slack community, manager mentors, where folks that are really good can be a resource as well. We've done a number of manager boot camps that give kind of core manager fundamentals, focusing on how do you recognize the individual motivations of individuals on your team? How do you get the most of each person, realizing how distinct and unique they are? How do you set goals? How do you address different scenarios? And I think that's a starting point. But manager development is ongoing, and it needs to take place both from the manager's manager, from HR, and really the manager community. Shrav, I know you've done a lot of work with managers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think selection, it starts with selection. Who do you, who becomes a manager, right? So oftentimes what we see is, your best performers, you want to get, sort of recognize them and you put them into management positions, whether or not they want to become managers or whether or not they have the skills or the sort of the basic sort of capability or competencies to be a manager. So I think making sure that you're putting the right people in those roles is a really good place to start, and really paying attention to that. And then as part of the boot camps that Candice you were referring to, one of the things that I've seen is eye-opening to a lot of managers is just how much power they hold, and being able to sort of really step into that power, right? So to recognize that, wow, in this position, I'm actually coaching someone, deciding on their entire experience or most of the experience at work, helping them get to the next step in their career, or sort of really paving their way to be their best selves, right? And kind of to think about that times the number of people on the team, and then as the team is growing. So to kind of really own and understand what the core role is, I think is important. Then comes the other parts of how do you hold your team accountable? How do you sort of create a vision and sort of purpose for your team? All the reasons that employees love to come to work, but a lot of it is kind of centered on what is the main thing you are expected, or the space you're holding as a manager.
And then building on that, managers need feedback, just like employees need feedback. And so, we've worked with companies that are rolling out upward feedback systems so that the employees can be giving the manager feedback, so that peer managers can be giving the manager feedback as well. No one is a good manager from day one. It takes time. It's a skill that you have to develop. You have to be willing to invest in that employee and giving them that feedback. But also at the end of the day, if somebody's not a good manager, you got to take it away from them. And that's hard. Those are hard conversations. Unfortunately, we both have had to have those. But you're not helping anyone out if there's a bad manager on the team. That actually can be really destructive for the team. So being willing to make some hard decisions if someone's not growing into that role.
And you think part of that is like the person, like, suppose I promoted John to be a manager. John's working out. If I say, hey, you're not a good manager, that's like me admitting I made a mistake, right? And I think a lot of people are not willing to do that, are they?
Yeah, you're right. Or they're like, no one else can fill this role. Or, I don't want them to leave the company. If we shift them into an individual contributor role, there's a number of different reasons and excuses. But at the end of the day, the damage, I mean, we've all seen this, the damage can be worse than keeping them in that role. So yeah, that the manager's got to be humble. They've got to realize that they're making a mistake as well if they don't make a change.
So for the startups you work with, is it founders coming to you directly for help? Or do like startups, board of advisors and board of directors come to you and say, hey, I need to refer you to the startup founder. They need help with the HR. How does that work for y'all?
It comes from various sources. Sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the head of HR. We will often work with a company where they just receive some funding and the head of HR is growing their team and they can't hire fast enough, or they need some folks who've done performance management or leadership development. They'll reach out to us. Sometimes it's a connection through a VC firm or even through a board as well. So, or other consultants who know our work and know what our focus is. So it comes from a number of different sources.
And y'all mainly focus on the Bay Area or y'all nationwide?
We're open, yeah. I think we tend to be more focused here, but we're absolutely open. We work with companies that have offices globally as well, right? And oftentimes we'll get tapped on when they are trying to be in other locations as well, sort of help them scale and grow.
But we have clients that are based in Boston and New York, their headquarters. So, and now that things are more remote, it's opening up even more opportunities to work distributedly.
Yeah.
Can the two of you talk about your entrepreneurial journey a little bit more?
Our journey as entrepreneurs?
Yes.
Oh, that's right. We're founders as well, right, Shrav?
We are.
I'm going to throw this one to Shrav.
That's interesting. I was going to say Candice, because Candice started before me as an entrepreneur. But yeah, it's been really interesting for me. So I just to kind of a little bit of further background. So after being at Google, I went to Coursera to head up their people function there and build out their people function and sort of help Coursera scale. And when I did that, I knew that I wanted to, like as I said in the beginning, wanted to take what we had learned at Google to add to other companies, other startups. And Coursera was a very sort of great first step for me. But when I was there, it was a very rapid time, and we did so much great work, and I learned so much. But I had the bug to take that even further. How can I multiply? I just loved that process of going in and really helping other companies transform and grow, and building out some of this infrastructure early. So as soon as and it felt like as soon as we decided that we want to do this together. Candice had been doing work with startups prior to me leaving Coursera, and then we decided to join forces and start doing this work with startups, sort of almost force multiply our ability to touch a lot of companies and people and employee experiences. And it's been great. It's felt like we work with a lot of different industries and sizes and stages of companies. Sometimes it's directly with with the founder, where they really don't even have any sort of real sort of people infrastructure in place, and other times it's been where they have some, but now they're looking to scale it. But it's been fascinating and really interesting, at least to me, coming from years at Google, where one of the things about Google, well, you kind of get lost in just kind of how much there is to do inside the company. Even though we were in Silicon Valley, we felt like we were almost like in our own bubble, but stepping out of that and learning very quickly about all these different mindsets and companies and founders and boards and VC firms. I mean, it's just been an incredible journey so far. And then of course 2020 happened, and now it's like every week it's something new, right? It's now it's like, how do we deal with mental health and COVID, and how do we help companies cope and employees cope with that to remote, and then this week is different. So it's been really, really amazing and fast for me.
And we've had to pivot. I mean, COVID-19, we had clear plans for 2020. We spent Q1 really thinking about scaling, and then COVID-19 hit, and the conversation was, how can we best help companies right now? Because contracts were put on hold, work we were planning to do with them completely shifted, and so how can we provide the biggest value? And so it's keeping us on our toes for sure.
Yeah, for me, like I have my own startup, and like we started like to fundraise and like get customers right when they hit, right? So obviously that's been a big, I mean, it is what it is, right? So I work through it. And I remember it was on Facebook a while ago. Somebody put, 2020 is what everyone thought the year 2000 was going to be.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So go back to your first days as an entrepreneur, right? I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm going to do a startup. So what is a preconceived conception you have about being an entrepreneur that you found out was wrong?
Wow, that was about 3 years ago. It's a lot of work. I mean, there's the product that you offer, the service that you offer. There's all the administrative stuff. There's the ongoing relationship building. I mean, I know we both worked a lot when we were at Google, and Shrav was at Coursera. But I think I work harder now, but it's in different ways. It's stretching me to build out different types of skills and things that I had never done before. And I'm learning what I'm definitely not good at. And there's a lot of things that I'm not good at. But it's a hustle. It's ongoing. And I don't think that I had realized how much of that it would be. Yeah. What about you, Shrav?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of the full spectrum, right? We came into this, or I came into this thinking of myself as more as a subject matter expert, someone who wants to sort of really, like spread what I had learned, right? But I hadn't fully thought about thought it through enough to think, oh yeah, but that also included like BD and sales and like thinking about pricing and pricing models and, and then,
And
of course,
taxes.
like, and accounting and like, yeah, invoice, I mean, all the things, right? And at the same time, doing the work yourself, right? So like being able to sort of go out there and be the face of your company, and then coming back and and doing the work yourself, and producing, and yeah, it's a lot, and it's exhilarating, frankly, to me.
I think what's fun, like people would tell you, you should focus on marketing. All the market people focus on marketing. All the tax people focus on taxes. Like, I can't focus on everything, right? Like, it's
Exactly.
impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I think I laugh too, like for people, like I'm gonna start a business because I don't want a boss anymore. Well, your employer's gonna be a boss, your customer your boss, Or
Yeah.
people are like, I'm tired of working 40 hours a week. Okay, now you're gonna work 80 hours a week, right?
Actually, yeah. And then let's talk about vacation. Right? Thank goodness, we're the two of us that we can tag team, but the whole concept of vacation like has gone away, right?
Yeah, like my vacation, like once a week, I'll drink a beer from 2 to 4 somewhere. You're right. That's my weekly vacation, a 2-hour beer break.
Yeah. I find that when there's like administrative paperwork stuff, we both are like, do you want to take this? No, do you want to take this?
Yeah.
Exactly. So in your experience so far, what do you found that startup founders are getting wrong about HR?
I think the default for HR, and this is just kind of the history of HR, is the focus that I think the perception is it's about compliance. And that's the lowest common denominator, where I think HR and organizational development can really help companies build the culture, the norms, the practices, the people that they want. And I don't believe that many HR or many founders realize that partnership, that potential there, and having the right partner. And they think it's just about compliance and checking the box. Yeah. What about you, Shrav?
Yeah, I mean, I think by default, founders and CEOs, they tend to be really good at what the thing that they do, right? The product, and that's where their mindset is all the time, and where it should be. It's not. It's not very often, or not as often as we would like to see, where they also start thinking about the company they want to build, right? And I think being able to hold both of those in parallel, I think is where is the sweet spot, right? Because at the end of the day, you are building a company that then is for the sake of, in service to the product that you are so passionate about.
The two things I hear a lot is, one, we only have like 5 employees, we don't need HR yet, or we don't have 10 employees with HR yet. Or what I get a lot too is like, we're not hiring no one right now, I don't need HR, is what I hear a lot.
Yeah, and what does that really mean even, right? Because HR is so much more than just that. Exactly what you're saying, Jason.
So to expand on that, can you two talk about how expensive HR is? I don't think people realize everything involved in HR.
Oh, wow. Fundamental, there's the foundational things if you think about compliance and hiring, but there's also, there's your entire people strategy. Like, what's the leadership team? Who's leading what components? What are the strengths of the leaders that you need? How's the leadership team interacting? How are they developing the goals? To building out managers and leaders in the organization. How are you, building out succession planning, and how are you really helping folks reach their full potential to employees and performance and development, to communication and managing through change as things are shifting, compensation. And it's we could go on. Do you really want to ask this question?
It's the entire employee life cycle, right? From when you receive that resume, right? However you receive it, to when you conduct the exit interview and beyond, because they're taking your brand outside even once they've left. So it's everything, really.
Yeah, I would argue HR is the only business part that touches every part of the employee's life cycle, right? From beginning to end.
Absolutely, and every employee, when I was at Coursera, one of the things that became really real, that was my first time being head of HR, right, of a whole company, and it became really really real to me that the HR the HR leader and the CEO are the only two people in the entire company that touches every single employee, whether whether it's full-time, part-time, whatever the equation might be, candidates, when they're not even employees.
Yeah. Talk about the importance of having a bench. For example, I'm of opinion that every employee you have, you set at least 2 or 3 people in mind to take that person's place, right? Because you never know when they're going to quit or they have to leave. I think you sort of have like in your mind, okay, my marketing person is great, but if they have to leave, I'm gonna reach out to these 2 people. Can you talk about the importance of doing that? I think too many companies, my marketing person left, man, let me go on Indeed and find someone, and by then it's too late, right?
Yeah, yes, it's critically important to always think about how whether they're leaving or whether they're moving to a different role, or whether the role is expanding or something else, right? So how do you constantly keep the talent pool flowing so that you're able to help people leave, whether it's moving on and kind of succeeding somewhere else or moving on within the company, they're able to leave, and and others therefore have a place to go. So not necessarily looking externally first, but looking internally. Do you have who are you developing to take on the next role? But then at the same time, making sure that you're not only so to kind of to balance what you said, Jason, you're not only thinking about who do I know, right? Whether again it's internally or externally, because you want to broaden your net. You want to make sure they are not thinking only about the people because more likely than not, they're probably just like you or like the people that are already on your team. So you want to have a more diverse outreach. So always think, always be hiring, always be recruiting, always be thinking about how you're making sure you're putting your company and yourself out there to touch a lot of people, whether it's through events or LinkedIn or however else.
Yeah, and to build on that, on the topic of inclusion that you were hitting on, Shrav, is I think sometimes managers perceive that somebody might not be interested in taking on a role if it opens up. And so that may filter out a large audience, and that could be a growth opportunity for, a woman they might be overlooking or an underrepresented minority. So as a position opens up, you may have an idea of who you think the right person is, but really open it up broadly to this team and see who might be interested. And sometimes folks might not be ready today, but they might be ready in 2 to 3 months. And so investing that time to help them grow into the role, you're going to have a committed employee, and you may have a very different perspective, which is important as well.
One thing, let's talk about the candidate process. So right now, I think a lot of companies are having a missed opportunity. Like suppose you have an opening, and we'll say 50 people apply, right? I think normally people will they might call back 10 of them. So 40 of them, they have no call, no email. You have 50 eyeballs on your website, right? I think that's just a missed market opportunity for your company as far as employer branding. Like restaurant, Adam, ask them, can I add you on my email list? Can we keep in touch with you? I think too many companies well, these didn't make the cut and, put in the black hole, whatever. I'm not sure they were doing it on purpose, but still, right? I think that's a missed opportunity for a lot of companies.
Absolutely, yeah. Your employer brand is your brand, right? And you can't think about it any different from your marketing brand or your marketing work, right? So oftentimes you're right, companies don't think about it that way. Companies don't think about candidates as also being consumers or customers or or future employees, right? So it's critically important to pay attention to that candidate experience. And at every touch point, yes, application, which is the first one, to your example, and making sure there is some sort of feedback loop. Oftentimes given volume, that initial feedback loop tends to be sort of automated, right? To have that system in place where you can at least acknowledge, and then when the system itself is sort of, when you close out the resume, gives kicks out something that says that your resume is now closed out for this role, but come back in for future roles. But then keeping that amount of rigor at every step of the process, right? Whether it's you're doing a phone screen or and so on and so forth, making sure that you're not only circling back but also being clear about, what that means because of this particular role. And then the deeper one, the more one engages with your company during the process, being really good about feedback, thinking about having that mindset of being able to help that person for the future, whether it's your company or somewhere else. Recruiting teams that we've worked with, we really kind of build that in around the feedback loops, whether it's automated or whether it's sort of in person. And then, we always recommend after a certain point, it has to be a phone call. It just can't be an automated response. So yes, your employer brand is very, 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 very crucial in everything that you do.
If I could expand on employer brand, I mean, beyond the hiring process, but I think right now, Jason, companies are having an opportunity to either improve or not their brand. I mean, when we think about how COVID-19 is impacting companies, there are many companies that are having to lay off or furlough employees. That's how it is. But how you do it, if you do it humanely, empathetically, as holistically as possible, says a lot about you as a company and how you value your employees. Are you making, there's so many steps that companies can take, cutting non-essential costs across the board, having leadership teams take costs, different steps they can take before they actually lay off and furlough employees. And then ultimately when they need to, how are they communicating this? What are they doing to help support the employees that are impacted, and leveraging their network and helping them find other jobs and roles, I think is super key. And there's a lot of chatter now. We're talking with a lot of companies, some that are doing it well and some that are not doing it well. So when the economy turns and they're going to go back and wanting to hire folks, this is going to be part of their brand and it's going to be harder. And another thing, much more real time, is how are companies standing up in solidarity against the racial injustices that we are reminded of, but not just standing in solidarity about improving external systems of injustice, but what are they doing internally as a company to hold themselves accountable? And is there systemic disparities within their company, be it through their processes or their programs, through hiring, through performance management, through promotion as well. So, employees are really holding their companies accountable, as they should, to the quality of their overall experience and how they're being treated as employees across the board, both COVID-19, but also the racial injustices that we're seeing today.
Yeah, and back to the layoffs, I think a lot of companies are doing wrong. I think a lot of companies follow the thing, last hired, first fired, right? But is that the way you do it? Shouldn't be based on production of the person is given, right? Instead of like the data hire. I think a lot of companies are doing that wrong.
Yeah, I mean, last in, first out. These or purely based on sort of their last performance rating. I mean, having one sort of single thing usually falls flat, right? So having a more holistic approach to how you come to those decisions. Often it's what is functional, sort of it's a business decision, right? Because these skill sets are no longer needed at the volume that you have, right? So therefore the company is being forced to think about how do we sort of manage that redistribution of what's needed, what the work that needs to get done. Performance is definitely a factor, but only if you've had in place objective mechanisms to rate performance, right? So yeah, it's tricky. It's never one single thing, and that's part of all, something that companies don't understand. They kind of think of it very much as sort of a legal perspective, or only a like you said, like first and last in, first out. It has to be much more holistic.
So I have a theory, and tell me if you agree or disagree. So I think right now in HR, there's a HR of no, HR of old versus the HR of yes, and HR of new. So old HR is like, they only work 9 to 5, all about compliance, everything's black and white. If you ask them, hey, did you hear so-and-so's leaving marketing? I don't run marketing. That's not a concern of mine. Or, hey, HR person, this employee needs to talk to you, but I can't come until for 5. Well, I'll leave at 5, so I don't know what to sell them. Or they work at some kind of production factory. They ever go down the floor, right? If someone brings an idea to actually improve stuff, well, this is a great idea, but it means more work for me, so I'm not gonna do it. So new HR is more like, they're on the floor, everything going on in the company. They believe in compliance, but they try to, try to find a way, yes. And a better example, like old HR, like suppose that you have best employee you have for 10 years, but you have a policy that says if someone misses work for 3 days, you don't know where they're at, you have to fire them, right? And so old HR, the policy says we haven't heard from 3 days, fire them. New HR is more like, okay, the policy says we're going to fire them, but at least find out what's wrong with them, right? Maybe had an accident, right? How do you think we switch from old HR, so to speak, to new HR? Because I think a lot of HR people are still stuck in the old HR ways.
Can we throw out another option?
Yes. Yes.
I would like not just new HR, but the future of HR.
Oh, that's a good one too, yeah.
An HR leader should be looking 6 months down the road, 2 years down the road of where is the company going? How are we building? What are the skills that we need to get there? How are we building our company, both the culture to be dynamic and the skill sets to get us there? So it's not just today or tomorrow. It's down the road, and really having that close collaboration with the leaders to understand the business. Like good HR leaders, I know the best I know, really get the business. They know what the business needs are, and then they're thinking about the people to get the business there.
That's a great point. And whenever like people say, how can I get an HR job? I say, well, don't get an HR job. Pick a business you want to work in and learn that business first, and we'll narrow it down.
Great idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I understand y'all two have a gift for our listeners.
Yeah, we both, we are HR folks to our core, and we know this is a really challenging time right now to really support our employees, our leaders in every way possible. So we are doing free consultations. Feel free to reach out to us. Our website is peoplerunway.team. You can contact us there. We're happy to jump on a call and talk through any challenges that you might be confronting, and we can share what we're seeing others do, best practices, and just try to help you navigate right now. I mean, there's no roadmap on how to work through COVID-19. We also see a really great opportunity to employ and to improve the employee experience and increase representation and fairness within the workforce. And so if you're working through your organization and how to improve some of your processes, we're happy to talk through and help you figure out how you might do that.
And can you two share your social media links for both yourself and your company so people can reach out to you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach out to us. And then also our website is peoplerunway.team.
And to our listeners, we'll have the links to everything on our show notes. And you can find the show notes at www.cavnesshrblog.com. So talk about numbers and data. How's that important to HR? Because it kills me when an HR person says, I don't do numbers, I do data. I just want to flip out, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, how's this possible? To me,
Yes.
HR is nothing but data, right?
I think it's both, but yeah, Shrav, you take this one. We were just talking about this yesterday.
I know. Yes, I know. Yeah, so I have the same reaction as you, Jason. That is not a thing at all, and it's a myth that absolutely needs to be busted. No, so HR is it's everything. It is about the data. If data is behind everything, including HR, including people, including how you run a company. If you don't know what the data is saying, then you won't know how to make any progress. You won't be able to. And then how do you know if you're making progress if you can't measure it, right? So being able to having the mindset and capability to collect data and then use it effectively is the only way that we can grow our companies, scale our companies, make progress towards a better business, whatever it is that our goals are. So data is absolutely important. It starts with knowing who your people are, what are your demographics. We're surprised that there are companies that kind of walk that line between, we don't necessarily want to sort of be intrusive and ask questions that people may not be comfortable sharing. But it's not that at all. That the mindset is that if I know you, then I can help. If I know you, then I can stand in support, right? So collecting data, starting with demographics is absolutely critical, and then going from there, understanding what is our starting with at the beginning of the employee life cycle, so to speak. What does our candidate pool look like? who's passing through it at what rates, how does the employee experience look like, how is it different for people in different, it's not, and it is very important around groupings of minority or race and all of those different demographics, but also by department, by location, by level, like name it, right? So yes, to answer your question, data is all important and very, very critical to doing good HR work.
If I could build on that, once you have the data, then what's the story behind the data? So if you've got high attrition in pockets of your company, why? Why are people leaving? Is it the manager? Is it their lack of psychological safety? Like, what's driving that? So I wouldn't just, and I'm a numbers person, so Shrav's probably laughing because I'm saying this, but really understanding behind the story behind the data so that you can make even more targeted and intentional decisions to improve it and turn things around. So I think it's both, but I love to start with the data and then understand the story that's wrapped around it.
And I'm the opposite, right? So I look at we're both sort of, that's why we make a great team, because it's like, the forest and the trees. One of us, we each come at it from a different perspective, but we come together. But yes, absolutely. It's what's happening, understanding at a meta level, understanding what might be behind it, and then being able to address it more in a much more targeted, focused way.
So let's talk about Generation Z for a minute. So Generation Z, I believe, is the first generation group complete with technology, right? With cell phones, TikTok, Snapchat, instant access, all that kind of stuff. How does HR, transform or whatever they got to do to make sure they support this new generation and what they need or what they want, either as employees or owners or whatever the case may be? Because I think a lot of generations, they'd expect to apply for jobs online, get updates online. I mean, on their cell phone, whatever the case may be. How does HR make the transition? Or is HR even capable of making that transition?
Well, we don't have a choice, right? If you don't change and evolve, then we're all dinosaurs. So yes, there's we have to change and evolve to meet the generation where they are. I have a 15-year-old in my house, so I live with it every day. But the way we've seen it, we've already seen where HR is moving and shifting is to make everything much more online, much more app based. Whether it's feedback. We talked about feedback and performance a little while ago, where there are mechanisms for feedback that are app based and much more suitable for some employees, but not necessarily others. So I think it's kind of, again, taking into account the spectrum of your employee base and having more than one way of doing things, right? So sometimes in person or a live conversation, when I say live or in person, I mean including video. A conversation is much more acceptable to one set of employees, and another is give me an app and give me faces that I'll click on, right? So yeah, I think being agile and being open is really important. And in all of this, I think speed, one of the things that Generation Z, like, I'm sort of, just in awe at the amount and capacity of, that they have to consume and act and move. I mean, it's just incredible, right? The processing speed has increased at a higher rate than the processing speed of computers, it seems like, right? So, so yes, so knowing who your audience is and being able to to keep up is critical.
So we'll come to the end of our talk. Can you two give us any advice or wisdom on any subject you want to talk about?
Well, honestly, top of mind for us right now this week has been employee experience in so many different ways. And, this has come out in our conversation where companies are really defining themselves on how they're treating their employees through the COVID-19 crisis, being flexible and supportive and providing, being flexible in when folks are working and what those expectations might be based on people that are directly and indirectly impacted by COVID-19. But also, being flexible and recognizing, the reminder of the systemic racial injustices that are happening and the impact that it's having on employees as well. and taking a stand in solidarity, but also looking internally as an organization, and how can you be better as an organization, address issues internally also. So I think it's been a tough time, but I think this is also an opportunity to see change, a shift for improvement, and ultimately companies, we believe, can improve the employee experience, but they've got to be intentional and they've got to be thoughtful in how they approach it.
Yes, and so let me backtrack for a minute. I forgot to answer this question. Can you two talk about how you started a company and what your company does and what your vision for your company is?
Oh,
You take
yeah. Sure. You know, I mean, I think we did reference it a little bit in the beginning when we were talking about our passion for making the employee experience better, and that shows up in, you know, in everything that we do, and that's kind of the lens that we use, right? So, as you know, so we want to help companies scale, transform, pivot the way they need to, and while they're doing that, we want to make sure that we are offering our skills and what we've learned through the span of our careers of how to make that experience of their employees much better at work. We all spend so much time at work, and and having been at Google for the both of us for so many years, just understanding the importance of employee experience and seeing that it's not the same and everywhere else has been really, you know, a great has been eye-opening for us. So we want to take that and bring it to as many companies as possible. How you do that in a more in a sort of specific concrete way is through intentionally curating your culture, intentionally putting in place your people infrastructure, whether it's processes that start with compliance. You know, what do you pay attention to in your compliance regulations, or you know those aspects, that aspect. How do you craft your employee handbook? All of these are forming the foundation for the company you're going to build into the future, and sort of putting in place. We're called People Runway actually because you're kind of building the runway for flight, right? And flight doesn't always have to mean, you know, going from a 10-person, 100-person company to 10, you know, 100,000 person company. That's not the only way of thinking about flight. Flight is what, you know, why do you exist and where do you want to go? And we want to be there to help you get there.
Thank you very much. So any last minute things you want to talk about?
No, I mean, just reiterating, you know, what Candice said earlier about our offer. You know, we want to be here for as many people as possible. We're offering our time. That's, you know, we talked about it between the two of us. How do you, you know, how are we uniquely positioned to help the best we can? And we concluded that out of all of the skills we have and the way and what we know, what we do know is to help companies get through times of, you know, difficult times of change, and we are offering our time, and we hope and look forward to people reaching out and sharing with us.
Yes, I want to thank the two of you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. This has been fun.
Yeah.
Take care.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. Remember to be great every day.